Welcome to this webinar that will delve into some of the many and difficult relations between COVID-19 vaccines and global inequalities. My name is Bjørn Enge Bertelsen, and I'm the director of the Global Research Program on Inequality. The Global Research Program on Inequality is co-organizing this webinar with the Pandemic Center at University of Bergen, dedicated to surveying and researching past, present, and future pandemics. The focus for this webinar is as broad as it is important, namely the question of access and equal distribution of vaccines. For we all know that vaccines are key to both managing and coming to terms with the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. However, as is blatantly clear from news across the world, not least from Brazil and India most recently, current forms of vaccine inequality pose serious threats to us all. For what are the consequences of wealthier nations grabbing most of global vaccine supply? How does it affect pandemic control on a local and, perhaps more importantly, global scale? What are the current models for vaccine distribution in Norway and beyond? And are there more just and fair possible alternatives? With us today, we have a number of researchers and practitioners that will help us get closer to an understanding of these and other thorny issues. And the discussion will be led by Dr. Esperanza Diaz. Esperanza Diaz is a medical doctor and professor at the Department of Global Health and Primary Care at the University of Bergen. She has worked extensively with issues relating to migrant health and service provision in Norway and beyond. She is also the director of the newly started Pandemic Center at the University of Bergen. With us today, we also have Dr. John-Arne Røttingen. Røttingen is Norway's Global Health Ambassador and oversees Norway's global health efforts and participation in international activities to combat COVID-19. He was the founding chief executive officer of Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. Røttingen also chairs the executive group and the international steering committee of WHO's Solidarity Trial. In 2021, Røttingen was appointed by the G20 to the high-level independent panel on financing the global commons for pandemic preparedness and response. Welcome, John-Arne. We also have with us today Professor Gagandeep Kang. Kang is a professor of microbiology at the Wellcome Trust Research Laboratory at the Christian Medical College, and she is one of India's leading experts on vaccines. She has worked on the development of vaccines for rotaviruses, cholera, and typhoid, conducting large studies to define burden, test vaccines, and measure their impact. She is a member of several advisory committees for the WHO. In 2016, she was awarded the prestigious Infosys Prize in Life Sciences for her contribution to understanding the natural history of rotavirus and other infectious diseases. Welcome, Gagandeep. We also have with us today Professor Henriette Aasen, a professor of law from the University of Bergen. Aasen is a well-established researcher in the field of health and human rights, including access to healthcare services for vulnerable groups, patient rights, and the relationship between welfare state regulations and social citizenship. Her research focuses on the role of socioeconomic human rights in advancing human dignity and democracy. Welcome to you also, Henriette. We also have with us Erlend Groningen, and Groningen is a board member of Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, and he has been the acting spokesperson for MSF in Norway throughout the pandemic. He's a specialist in internal medicine and lung diseases and works as a chief physician at the Oslo University Hospital. In addition, he's also an engaged field doctor at MSF and a PhD candidate at the Center for International Health at the University of Bergen. Last but not least, we have with us Dr. Mosoka P. Fallah. Fallah is the founder and executive founder executive director of Refuge Place International, an NGO in Liberia addressing access to affordable quality healthcare for poor and urban rural dwellers. Until recently, Mosoka was the Director General of the National Public Health Institute of Liberia, which he co-founded in 2017. He was named one of Time magazine's Persons of the Year in 2014 for his Ebola relief efforts in Liberia. So welcome all of you. And I do trust we have a fantastic panel with us today. And I also urge all of those of you who follow us online to submit your questions in the chat so that we can post them to the panelists. And with that, I give the floor to Esperanza, who will moderate this discussion. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all panelists who are with us today. We are going just to go around the world, and we begin with the situation from India and Liberia, and then we'll go further to the COVAX global room, and then to Norway. So if we don't have any problems with this sound, I will now invite Dr. Mosoka to tell us a little bit about the situation from your point of view. I'm not sure that if he's having problems with the sound now. If not, while we are waiting, I suggest that we go a little bit further to India, and then I invite Dr. Kang to start and tell us the situation from your place. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Esperanza. It's such a pleasure to be with you and talk to you about something that affects all of us in the developing world. If we think about India and the number of doses of vaccine that have been given in India, the fact that we have vaccine manufacturers, I think we were very optimistic in December that we would be able to roll out vaccines quite fast and be able to deliver them to our priority groups. We actually started our vaccination program with 2 vaccines on the 16th of January, and we have so far given out 182 million doses of vaccine. Now that sounds incredible. It is incredible. But the population of India is 1.4 billion. So where we are today is approximately 12% of the population has received 1 dose of vaccine, and only 3% of the population has received 2 doses of vaccine. We reached a height of almost 4 million doses of vaccine being given out in a day. And that now is down to 1.8 million, sometimes 1.5 million doses of vaccine given out in a day. If we continue at this pace, we will be able to immunize about 75% of our population in 3 years. And that is, of course, not something that we would like to see as a situation. But even within this distribution, there is inequity because we are registering people for vaccination according to priority groups, which are the above 60s, which have followed healthcare workers and essential workers, the 45 and above, and now to the 18 to 44 group. The problem is that all of this requires registration through an electronic app, and smartphones which can host that app are only available to a small section of the population. And for the first few weeks, the app was only in English. And India, as you know, has 22 languages, and there are many people that don't speak English. So I'm just laying out the challenges that we have. I'll stop there and come back with more later.
Thank you very much indeed for your presentation. I think Dr. Fallah is still having problems. I will give now the turn to John-Arne Røttingen, who's with us as well.
Hello.
Oh, you are with us. Very welcome, Dr. Fallah. Welcome. Now, the floor is yours. Please give us the situation report from your side.
Overall, if you looked at Liberia and the entire African continent, or say West Africa, on the surface, it would appear that we are doing very well. My country, for instance, have a total of 2,118 cases and 11 new cases in recent times. These are the numbers across most of West Africa. So looking at it from afar off, one will celebrate and see the situations as well. But what this does not tell you is that most of the African countries, West African countries, are not testing enough. In fact, most of the testing that are being done in West Africa currently are only done for travelers at the airports. Travelers leaving the country are tested. So that, just imagine in a country of 4.5 million, how many persons are traveling? So this is a situation all across Africa, West Africa, which is worrying. We don't know the extent of the transmission in the communities because there are no more testing in the communities. Only the few wealthy persons who are on international travel go to get tested, and yet we are picking up cases. And so we are not testing a lot in Africa. And so there are two consequences, one of which is that people in Africa, most of the countries I've traveled to, have this false sense of security. I went to a meeting where I had a mask and people were saying to me, why are you wearing masks when we do not have COVID-19? So many of the African countries are having the false sense of security, which is not true. It's just that we are not testing in the community, which is worrying. It means you're having something to be traveling. The second consequence is that, and we have the conviction that there are large-scale transmission going on, which give a high probability of mutations of variant strain being formed, but the inability to test in large scales, the inability to do any type of sequencing makes Africa the perfect storm. And I worry every day that passes. All prevention measures are down. People have let down their guards. People gather together in large groups to go to football games, political rallies with no masks because they are testing far fewer persons and the same few cases, they have the security. That's the biggest worry. In terms of protection, Africa is very vulnerable. If we were to have a major outbreak, why do I say so? Liberia has 4.5 million persons. They were given 96,000 doses of vaccine. You do the calculation. Ghana has around 27 million persons. They were given around 250 doses of vaccine under the COVAX. So we think that we've done well, and there were publicity that COVAX has begun and started. But imagine the minute fraction. Most of the African countries have less than 1% vaccine available to the population. In the midst of complacency, with all of the risk factors for a potential big outbreak and no preparation and no vaccine, I'm worried about Africa. That I'm sorry to say that, but I told someone, if 25% of what has happened to India, 25%, 1/4 of what is happening to India today happens across the continent of Africa, we see one of the greatest human calamity. And nothing has been done. Most of the wealthy nations are still holding the stockpile to the vaccine, in excessive vaccine doses. My simple message is that Africa is vulnerable. And even what we see in Kenya and other African countries with rising cases, Africa is still in the woods. There is an urgency to change our thoughts, to give our urgency and remove the false sense of security, to invest in testing, to invest more into vaccine, which is not. So Africa is very, very vulnerable. Thank you for now.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm very happy that you made it with the sound. John-Arne Røttingen, what do you tell us from your point of view?
Oh, thanks for the opportunity to participate in this panel, and really useful to hear the perspectives from India and Liberia. I was thinking of starting actually in Norway, and actually how we think about vaccines, because we believe access to vaccination and being protected by vaccine is a public good. It's a responsibility for the government, it's a responsibility for the state. It's something we fund through taxation, and it's offered for free now in the COVID-19 situation to everyone, at least adults. And equitable access is important in our context as well. It's considered a right, a human right even. But just look at the current debates here in Norway. We hear now how the cities and municipalities that now may get vaccines at a somewhat lower pace due to prioritizing the areas with a higher force of infection. What are they saying? It's cities like Skien or municipalities like Sola. No, they say, do not take our vaccines. And that's just because they may have 2 or 3 weeks later vaccination than they would otherwise have had. So how do we translate sort of those perspectives, the public good perspective, the access being a responsibility of the state to the international and global space? To achieve access, we need availability and we need affordability. And in one way, we have sort of achieved that. We've managed to have available vaccines in less than a year from the sequencing of a new virus. That is fantastic. It's a huge achievement. It's a collaboration between public and private sector. It's a collaboration between global actors. It's partly, I should say partly, but it's not fully. And Dr. Kang knows this well. We have both worked for and on behalf of CEPI. CEPI has played an important role in both supporting R&D for COVID vaccines, as well as ensuring that we have a broader portfolio and can follow the portfolio. And actually, to be honest, we also have generally affordable vaccines. The prices are, unfortunately, I would say, not transparent, but the reported average dose price is around $5. It's not cheap, but it's not expensive either. It's actually rather a cheap commodity. And the prices range from probably $3 to $15. This is still, though, not affordable to all. And that's why we have created the COVAX facility to buy vaccines on behalf of countries and populations that have lower purchasing power. And then to actually make that work, we need financing. And we have been able to mobilize billions of dollars to buy vaccines through the COVAX facility. So why do we have a problem? We seem to have sort of corrected this. Now, this is because this is not only a demand side problem. It's not about only making sure that we can compensate the lack of purchasing power by providing donor funds. It's a much more complex situation. We have a constrained supply. We have a demand that is much higher than the supply. We need 15 billion vaccine doses for one disease when we normally produce in the world 3.5 to 4 billion vaccines across all diseases. So it's an exceptional situation. And the problem then is that even though we have established through the ACT Accelerator, the COVAX pillar and the COVAX facility, it took too long time. That facility didn't have money in the bank to enter into contracts until almost half a year, or at least many months later than the countries that could both take risk and also to lend money. None of that is possible for Gavi, and Gavi needed the money in the bank to actually enter into contracts. So then we have the inequities we just heard about. We have achieved 50% vaccine coverage in UK, US, 25% in Europe. We heard around 12% in India, but less than 1% in all of sub-Saharan Africa. And this has become, of course, even more challenging given the very understandable export constraints from India, given the current situation in India. Which means that the supply to COVAX has even been reduced because COVAX wanted to maximize number of doses and went for large-scale production facilities, and India could provide that. But of course, in the current situation, it's challenging. So how do we correct this? In the short term, donations. In the longer term, expanding production. And I'm happy to discuss both of those issues later in the panel.
Thank you very much indeed for this overview that you have given us. Now I have just by my side Dr. Henriette Aasen, who has a juridical point of view in this. So please.
Thank you. And thank you to the presenters. It has been very interesting to listen to the realities in India and in Liberia. It's of course very difficult, and the African continent is clearly a big issue. I think from my point of view, as a legal scholar, and I think it's relevant to highlight some of the basic legal instruments that we have in international law. Just one point, of course, every government around the world, they feel as their primary responsibility to protect their own citizens and to focus on the national situation. That is understandable, but and that's also part of the human rights regulation that we have. But still, it is also a global state obligation to provide international support and to collaborate internationally to solve a global crisis. This is also part of international law that I think is needed to stress that. So we can mention the basic documents of United Nations, the Charter from 1945, stressing with the main purpose of making the world to collaborate in solving global crises, including health crisis. It is a basic aspiration of our global community. And also in the area of international economic and social cooperation, the UN Charter has provisions that are important for the states to follow. So we have also recently had UN human rights bodies talking about this international responsibility. We have a statement by the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights from March this year, focusing on some of these important issues to solve this global crisis. And I'd like to just quote a little bit from this very important statement from the UN body, highlighting part of the state's responsibilities is to secure access to a vaccine that is safe, effective, and based on the best scientific developments, that this is an essential component of the right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, and that the states have a priority obligation to take necessary measures to guarantee access to available vaccines of COVID-19 to all persons without any discrimination. And this is partly based on Article 12 of the International Covenant of Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, saying that the ratifying states recognize the rights of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, including with obligations to the prevention, treatment, and control of epidemic and other diseases, and to create conditions which would assure to all medical service and medical attention. And when it comes to the state obligations, it is about securing access within the state, but also mentioning in Article 2, international assistance and cooperation is part of the state obligations. This is very important a legal basis. And referring to these important legal obligations of state, the committee, UN committee, highlights that focusing on this problem of the international, the intellectual property rights that are a kind of a key concern here, making really problematic for the access, and saying that that it is fair that private business entities or public institutions or research that created vaccines, that they receive a reasonable compensation for their investments and the research. However, the committee reminds that intellectual property rights are not human rights, but a social product having a social function. Consequently, state parties have a duty to prevent intellectual property and patent legal regimes from undermining the enjoyment of basic rights, including health, the right to health. And also referring to the World Trade Organization Doha Declaration on the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights agreement, the TRIPS, and public health, the intellectual property regime should be interpreted and implemented in a manner supportive of the duty of states' responsibility to protect public health. So I think that these basic legal requirements are very important to keep as part of our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Very relevant law. And now, last but not least, we have Røttingen with us from Doctors Without Borders. So yes, there you are. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all right? Good. So yeah, I'm here on behalf of Doctors Without Borders, and we are a medical humanitarian organization, meaning that we respond to crisis globally. We're working across the globe, which gives us ears, it gives us eyes, it gives us a feeling with what's happening around the globe. But also, as an organization, we also sometimes feel the need to have a more structural approach. So that's why Doctors Without Borders, we have a campaign that we call MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, Access Campaign, where we've been working to make medicines and vaccines available to the global poor, and also have been struggling with patent rights and for many years, almost 20 years now. And when it comes to patents, we in our past have seen that they're not only important to bring the price down, but also to scale up production to serve the needs of the global South. So what happened initially when the pandemic started was that MSF, Doctors Without Borders, we were very much aligned with the people who work with priority setting in international health. And this means that we wanted a country's resilience, ability to withstand extra stress or a crisis, to be put in the focus when we wanted to later distribute vaccines. We wanted health professionals and people at risk globally to be vaccinated first, to save the maximum amount of lives. And immediately we pointed at patents. Even before there was a vaccine, we pointed at patents that there shouldn't be any profiteering, that all vaccines, all medicines to fight this pandemic should be available for everyone. And then we were very vocal about the vaccines needing to be people's vaccines, seen as a public good, as John-Arne described from the Norwegian setting. And what we actually saw then when the vaccines were there, we saw that the low and middle income countries, they launched an initiative in the World Trade Organization to ban all patents on COVID-19 related products, not only vaccines, also diagnostic tests, medicines when they are there, and other things you need to fight the pandemic, like personal protective equipment. So this patent proposal has been on the table since autumn. Things have changed a bit now with the US now proposing a more limited waiver on patents for vaccines, but yet there is no conclusion on this question. So what are we seeing in the field? Well, we're seeing dramatic reports from Latin America, from Brazil, and the second and third waves with the Brazilian mutations in the surrounding countries. We're having dramatic reports from our colleagues in India. We are seeing health workers who are stretched to the limit, in some instances, in some countries, due to political inability to cope with the virus in a proper manner. Brazil is an example of this. But we're also seeing the indirect effects, what we're calling the things that happens in the shadow of COVID-19, meaning that we're seeing that the number of reported tuberculosis cases is going down. We're seeing that childhood vaccination programs are stopping. We're having continuous measles outbreaks in the Democratic Republic of Congo now. We're struggling with other actors in the Congolese society to contain it and to vaccinate enough people, but we're struggling. We're seeing that women have less access to safe medical abortions. We're seeing that there's an increased risk of famine. We're seeing the health impacts of reduced income and reduced livelihoods. And for us working in international health, it just means that we're going to be very, very busy with the effects of COVID-19 in years to come. And if we are to get back on track on the SDGs and sustainable development, we have lots of work to do. So what's critical now? I think we agree with John-Arne that vaccine doses, surplus doses need to be changed. There's no silver bullet when it comes to scaling up production capacity overnight. But what we have been saying from the beginning is that we need to make sure that all available global vaccine capacity needs to be used. So we have received reports from vaccine producers in the global south, some producers in Canada, that they're not able to make deals with the pharmaceutical industry to scale up production. What we are asking for is that if not a full waiver of all COVID-19 related products, please a waiver of patent rights when it comes to the vaccines. Because what we need here is political leadership, and politicians or elected officials from the global south, they need to be given the tools to scale up production. And this model we're having now with charity to distribute vaccines, we're seeing that when the next pandemic hits us, charity is not a substitute for a good system. So we're seeing that vaccines, they are part of a global security.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I think it was a very nice picture that we have gotten from all of you. And I would like now to put some questions to each of you, because what we think to see here is that the same things happening at the national level are also happening at the international level. In a way, is the same problems again and again, but in a different scale. So I could begin with you, John-Arne Røttingen. There are a lot of good ideas or intentions. 2 billion doses by the end of 2021 for 190 countries, what the ideal, and now we are there, that is, as we were told by Dr. Fallah, under 100% of the population in some African countries. So how do you understand this vaccine nationalism, and what is the way out of it, not the list, from your point of view?
One, I think, back to what we heard from Henriette Aasen, which is a tricky balance, because the strongest sort of legal requirements on governments and countries is to protect their own citizens, and actually the legal requirements on international assistance and cooperation are unfortunately not as strong, neither in the international covenants or the international frameworks. We would in many ways have liked to see them stronger. We know that there is a target for official development aid, 0.7%. Very few countries are meeting that. And actually, this is, and why is that the case? I think the case is, of course, that the democratically elected leaders in these countries have not decided to try to increase that support because of their sort of considerations of the political situation. And why I'm saying this is that we need popular support and actually democratically elected governments to make these decisions. It's, to be honest, it's quite interesting to see then the protests from different municipalities in Norway. That they are also democratically elected politicians, but in their municipalities, actually to put those comments now in the media into the larger perspective, they are in a very different situation than leaders in African countries. And their point is that they can call out to one government and ask for their rights. The leaders in Africa cannot call out to any one government because we have no world government. And the only way to compensate for that is through trying to find collaborative solutions that can work together, where we can work together. And I think actually this situation in India is demonstrating that when the crisis is really tough, all nations, all governments would need to prioritize their own citizens. Then what that demonstrates is that we need sufficient capacities, and there I'm very much aligned with Groningen. We need sufficient capacities in all regions, at least, to produce vaccines. And that is what we are now working on in the COVAX and in the ACT Accelerator. That is to expand vaccine production capabilities in Africa, in parts of the Middle East, and in other regions that have too small capacities. And this is not a quick fix. And the quick fix, or the faster fix, is donations. It's to actually donate vaccines that are under production and where the high-income countries have contracts, and where we would be able to defer some of those to other countries. But just that, given this current situation, we also hear from Norwegian municipalities, we don't have a very strong voice across the political spectrum actually saying that we should donate, we should stop vaccination in Norway. We should stop vaccinating our 18-year-old or the 21 or the 45-year-old adults and wait until vaccine coverage has reached the health personnel and the high-risk populations in Africa. No one is saying that in the political spectrum in Norway. And that's the reality. And I think we actually need to root our discussion in reality. I think we need to try to find pragmatic solutions. So I hope and I believe Norway is working very hard through the ACT Accelerator and the COVAX collaboration to find those pragmatic solutions. Yes, it's a very difficult situation, and it doesn't help to sort of come with bold statements when we have a crisis like this.
No, that's true. And the way and the main issue is how we learn and how we go further. I'm going to read something that was written by Dr. Fallah. You wrote, "Constructs and frameworks hold well when it is to the convenience of the wealthy, but it fails to hold when adhering to them will challenge their economic prosperity and comfort." You wrote this regarding the situation that was happening a couple of years ago with the Ebola, which has not worked now. What is your view of what could be done now in the given situation to construct further, Dr. Fallah?
Thank you very much. So recently, I led a team of Ebola heroes, and we did a letter to the DG of WHO. I will share a letter with you. We wrote WHO DG, 30 of us who were involved with Ebola, including 81 other global health experts, including the widow of the late Hans Rosling, asking WHO to bring the world together to address certain key issues. The first issue we have, which we spoke about, is the issue of the SS vaccine. Nationalism for me is when one nation starts to hoard all of the excess vaccine and the raw material. All countries have an obligation to protect themselves. But if you begin to hoard the vaccine 2 times, 5 times your population, you are basically saying it is for your own comfort and well-being. It's no more an issue of security. So we're asking countries that are hoarding excess vaccine to give them out. The second point we stress, this is not charity, this is global security. And I said in my last talk that except the developed nation decided to live in islands, tiny islands and no interaction. If the global nation decide to live in tiny islands by themselves with no interconnectivity, then it's okay. But if us as humanity, if we succeed and we interact, there's no way we are going to succeed with one group having excessive vaccine doses kept for the future when other nations need them today. Yesterday, President Biden gave 80 million doses out. There's so much vaccine in some countries that they could immunize their population 2 to 5 times. The issue of tiered pricings, in our letter, we asked the World Health Organization to go for tiered pricing. We saw that happen in many drugs. The prices varies from continent to continent. Is there where we can set up a mechanism for tiered pricing? So it's no more charity, but so that some countries can pay based on their ability to pay. That's one of the things we are asking for. We'll come back to the fundamental issue of RP. India and Brazil have started asking for the right to start manufacturing months ago. And it's still a big debate. Even after President Joe Biden had said the US will make some attempt, there are a group of people that are lobbying actively against RP. But I think that's the greatest deception, the ability to hold on to RP and fight waiver. Because we all do know that most of the research for this vaccine that was spent by public money, taxpayer money, when it comes down to manufacturing, R&D and market, it's about excessive profits. Let's face reality, in the midst of our time when countries are losing millions of people, is it right that one company makes $34 billion profit? We are not asking that nations don't make profit, but is it right that a big pharma make billions in the midst of a lack, extreme lack, where India cannot even find means to cremate all of the deaths and they have to be in the Ganges River? This is our humanity. This is about our security. Or do we want to continue this cycle of creating new vaccine? So that's what we need to ask ourselves as human beings. This is not only about our morality and our ethics. This is about our global security.
Thank you very much for that. I will now pose my question to Dr. Kang, because something which is new, at least for me, which has happened now, is something which is—
This cannot be about excessive work for us and our children. Balance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concept of vaccine diplomacy, which has to do with countries that can produce vaccines and how to use them also for political purposes and other purposes. Do you want to say something about what is happening in India and what do you think about that?
Well, actually, it isn't just India. It was China as well. So it was a question of vaccine producing countries using their capacity of making vaccines to try and establish better relationships with other nations. A lot of the vaccines were given as donations. These were actually fairly small numbers of doses in the 100,000 range, a few 100,000s, that were distributed to countries as gifts. And quite frankly, if you have to give gifts and the gifts are vaccines, I think that's great. But the question is, are you giving the vaccine at the right time? Any kind of medical support is welcome, but are you giving the vaccines at the right time and to the places that need them the most? And are you setting up a pipeline so that the vaccine supply can be sustained? Because if you just give 100,000 doses and then you're done, then that's not really helpful, because the people who get the vaccines are going to be a very limited, very elite subset of individuals. So I think while in principle, sharing medical materials is absolutely something that should be promoted. The timing of that and the way in which it needs to be done is something that we should debate very carefully before we go ahead with that.
Thank you very much. And I did not mean that it was only India. It was just because you're here, the producer country. We are listening that a lot of this has to do with leadership and with politics. And I was wondering, there's a new report coming some days ago that was applying for some kind of more musculous or important WHO or some organization that couldn't take the lead. And I am asking you from a juridical point of view, is there any kind of there are some rules, but is there any corp to actually see that they are put into practice? Any kind of responsibility that can be, we can have a look at when this pandemic is over and say, well, this was done or this was not done?
Well, I would say that I agree with Røttingen that the legal infrastructure at the international level is not the best. And it doesn't really allow for kind of really punishing states that doesn't live up to their state obligations. So what we can do, I say, is to make them still, you can make them in a way accountable by focusing on the failures that has been done and what can be done better next time. And when it comes to leadership, I think it is important to talk about that because if we talk about the local and the global, and in Norway, we can see that it has been reported about the Norway first virus, that we are very focused on getting the best and that we should be prioritized, and people are very focused on that. But I think if the leaders had been more transparent and more focused on how Norway is part of the global community and seeing that we are all part of the global community, then perhaps all of us would be more aware, more even acting more responsible, being more willing to share. So I think that kind of attitude is very important to focus on. And then we can also wonder why Norway could not support this proposal of waiving some of the provisions in the TRIPS agreement in order to make other states put them in place so that they can produce their own vaccines using the recipes that are available globally. That's some of the things that we must talk about, and we also be critical about that process, I would say.
Thank you very much. We'll go for some questions from the panel, but just one more question to Erlend. You have been talking about freely giving these vaccines, and many with you, but is it really possible? I mean, can we believe that the big investigations, innovations are going to be conducted in the future if those big pharma industry are not going to have their profit? Do you have a view about that?
I think it's important to remember that what has happened during this pandemic is actually a scientific breakthrough for all of humanity, that never before have we seen vaccines developed at such a pace, and never before have we seen such collaboration between governments, universities, and the pharmaceutical industry. So I would very much object to this kind of typical political debate where we want to try to frame innovation as something that's either done by the private industries or by the public. This has been a huge collaborative effort indeed. So I think we're actually not doing ourselves any favors if we try to look at it through the old lenses. I think we should acknowledge that this way we have done it now is something very, very new. It's something that we should go ahead with in the future too. But what has been limiting us is production capacity and the ability to share the actual product of this collaborative effort. So I wouldn't go into this typical political right, political left debate. This is beyond this. This is a new model. We haven't seen it before. Maybe it's a good model in the continuation, but the model hasn't been good enough because we haven't been able as a global society to address the reduced production capacity for vaccines in parts of the world. And very much governments are first and foremost responsible for their own people, right? That the ones that elect them. No one is questioning this, but then when we are in a situation where most of the world's global production capacity is located in the West, we're facing a structural issue as a global society. So then we found a model that has worked this time, but we don't have the legal framework, and we don't have the sort of industrial setup to make sure that all parts of the world have the ability to produce for their populations.
Thank you very much indeed for your answer. I think we have a couple of questions from the public. So
yes, very interesting to listen to all of you, and striking observations by all of you. I was particularly struck by this notion of this being not just a question of equality or rights, but also a question of global security, a point that Dr. Fallah made. We have with us some viewers, and they have some questions. And one of the questions go to all of those of you who are global health professionals, in a sense. And the question is, what can organizations and individuals working in global health do to increase pressure to facilitate IP waivers and technological transfers to low and middle income countries to boost COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing? That is, how can we, that is you, support this? What can we do, in a sense? So if we could do a quick round with Dr. Fallah, Dr. Kang, and Dr. Røttingen and Groningen, that would be good. So Fallah first, please.
So we've already started that, like I said, last week we were with Rogers University Center on Bioethics. We had an international debate. We are starting to increase the media pressure in Europe, Germany, the US. So we have about 111 signatories, wide range from all across Europe, laying these conditions. And we are hoping that we can have even the center there trying to amplify our voices. I will share the letter we drafted, asking for these fundamental issues for the morality and the security of our continent. And given these conditions, we have the letter. We want more capital around the world to put pressure. We wanted it to be discussed at the World Health Assembly. We were told that it had to be introduced by a nation. We thought that bringing it at the coming World Assembly would have been great. So I will share with you guys. We have a lot of signatories, some people from Europe and Scandinavia have signed onto it, and the media pressure will be a great way to amplify our voices.
Thank you.
So if I go next, I think when we think about IP and we think about technology transfers, I'll just place something in context. We have at least 6 vaccine manufacturers in India. India makes more doses of vaccine than any part of the world. We started out with making vaccines for India and for the world in April of last year. We were predicting that at the end of December, we would be producing somewhere around 120 million doses of vaccine every month with just 2 manufacturers. Where we are today is we are getting less than 70 million doses every month. So manufacturers that are hugely experienced, that have made a range of different kinds of products, have been unable, in lines that they have worked on for a year, been unable to scale up manufacturing. So this is not a question of IP alone. It is IP, it is technology transfer, it is process optimization, it is a whole lot of things including the supply of raw materials, which we need to pay attention to. IP alone is not going to solve this problem.
Thank you, Dr. Kang.
And just to continue on that vein, I think what we need is more technology transfer. Gagandeep demonstrated the technology transfer to the Serum Institute of India for both the AstraZeneca vaccine as well as the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that company has the best experience in the world of actually expanding production and doing large-scale production, and still there are challenges. I think some of the challenges are just biological and just because it is difficult. Some are related to export restrictions. I think that is still, even though they have been lifted and export control has been lifted, there are some challenges related to that, but some of that is also just related to supply of raw materials. It's just the market needed more than we were able to produce, so it's even an upstream challenge. Then it's also important to know that all least developed countries, there is no patent protection. The patent is not, it is already a waiver in the TRIPS agreement for all least developed countries. So a company in Bangladesh can produce vaccines, and we hear reports of companies in Bangladesh wanting a patent waiver, but they already have in a way. So the challenge is not the IP, the challenge is the tech transfer and the willingness to do that. And then we need to push companies more to actually do the technology transfer and prioritize that. And that's I fully agree with Ireland saying that we need more political push for that. And I'm actually concerned that the discussions around the waiver can sort of move us away from understanding and tackling the real problems, because I think we need to focus more on the responsibilities of companies to do technology transfer and help setting up new manufacturing capabilities, because that's the real key issue. And most likely the World Trade Organization discussions will take time, and we cannot, if we wait for that, there will still need to be voluntary sharing of knowledge, know-how, biological samples, and a collaborative partnership model, because otherwise we will not be able to do tech transfer. And this is very different from producing chemical, small molecular weight chemical medicines. It's much more complex biological production.
Thank you. Alan, would you like to comment as well?
Yeah, I very much agree to the need to have political pressure on this, because many of us, we're meeting each other in different fora, but seldomly do we get to meet the real decision makers, the elected officials who answer to the people that have elected them, right? So I think it's very important that we keep this debate going, especially here in the global north, in the West, and we try to agree on the kind of moral foundation of the behavior of our governments. What are they doing? Is it an alignment with what we want our government to do internationally? Because nothing happens in a vacuum, right? All politicians will know this, that they are very sensitive to external influences when it comes to basically being re-elected. So I think then, as members of civil society, as non-governmental organizations, I think it's important that we enter debates and that we enter them sometimes asking for more than we know that we're going to get. Sometimes asking for a lot, it creates windows of opportunity where governments can use these voices to push the industry, to push elected officials from other countries into making a better solution. So this initial TRIPS waiver with putting aside patents on all COVID-19 related products was wide. I would agree that maybe it was impossible from the beginning, but we feel that it's also creating a window of opportunity if elected officials are willing to use this pressure.
Thank you.
I think we have to close down. It was really very good to listen or learn from all of you. And I wish we had more time to discuss also what is happening inside each country, because I'm completely sure that there are differences also within countries that have other kind of reasons and solutions, but we talk about next time. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. I'm sorry for the questions that were put that we don't have the time to answer. Thank you very much for you people being here and helping us to put all this Zoom into live. And we will keep talking and we keep together. Thank you very much.